There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
I don't want to freak you out, Betty, but I've been doing this show for how long, Liz? 5 years? 7 years. And for the last few years, when people have said, who's your dream guest, I've said you.
That's funny.
And my team are like, who?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't understand. I'm Mia Friedman. You're listening to No Filter, and that statement is not a word of a lie. For the past few years, Betty Klimenko has been my dream guest on this podcast. I've been asking and I've been asking. And if you, like my team, don't understand who Betty is or why I'm so keen to interview her, let me tell you. Once upon a time, there was a Holocaust survivor by the name of John Saunders. He settled in Sydney after the war with his wife Etta, who had also been a Holocaust survivor. And Etta had a chronic illness that meant she couldn't have kids. So in 1959, they went to an orphanage in Sydney and they walked past 20 babies and they picked the one that was laughing.
My father said, just 1 second. And he just walked up and down the rows of the children. And I was in the last cot at the very back and I was laughing. But what he didn't know, that the laughing was part of withdrawal.
They called her Betty. John and Etta would go on to adopt another child a few years later, a little boy. But by that stage, their lives were very different. John's career in Australia had taken off. And in 1960, alongside Frank Lowy, he formed the Westfield Group. You may have heard of it. John and Frank would go on to open over 100 shopping centres across the world, and they would become billionaires.
In the morning, I'd see him for 2 minutes and then he'd be gone.
So John worked very hard. He got very rich. And when his wife died, he remarried and had another baby, his third. So it's easy to assume that at this stage, maybe Betty might be forgotten for the new family. But that's not the case at all. Because Betty Saunders Klimenko would go on to have one of the most fascinating lives you can ever imagine. Which is why today, I've finally convinced her to come on No Filter. Most people don't know the circumstances under which they were conceived. But you do.
Yeah, I do. The first person I met that was biologically related to me was a cousin. And he was the person who was telling me, your mother was the black sheep of the family, but she'd been Miss Western Australia or something. I don't know what she was. And then she went down.
So she'd been a beauty queen.
Yeah, did the whole thing. Then she went down. She was born in Lithuania, but her family were Russian. They'd gone, after the revolution, they'd gone to Lithuania. Then they came to Australia and her whole life was changed. Everything was turned around. And unfortunately, she got into drugs. She was just on 6 foot. Apparently, my biological father was about 6'4". I've met two of my biological sisters and they're tall. They're very tall. But with me, she was on heavy drugs. So I ended up with stinted from elbow down and knee down. So from my knee to my elbow, I'm a big, tall woman. From knee down and elbow down, I'm not.
So she was on heroin or something when she was pregnant with you.
And she had been arrested for soliciting or whatever it was, and she was put into the jail at King's Cross. She and a policeman decided that it was a very good place to conceive a child.
I see. And you were born 9 months later.
Yeah, 9 months later, and then she decided she'd keep me. She'd given 3 away already, 2 to the foster system and 1 for adoption. And she kept me for 7 weeks. And I think she was trying to change the way of life. Like she had me baptised in a Catholic church or whatever you call it. After 7 weeks, she said, I can't do this anymore. And they drove from Queanbeyan up to Sydney and left me at the Women's Hospital.
So you would have been probably born addicted to drugs,
yeah, I was.
Drug dependent.
I was. And that actually got my father to pick me because back then you went into a room. There was like 20 kids in there in cots and you said you picked a child and said, this is the child I want.
Because there were orphanages back then.
Exactly. And He walked in the room and they'd picked a child from a male, and he was dark, had dark eyes, looked more on the Mediterranean European side than me.
Your father and your mother wanted a child that looked like them. They couldn't have children.
That's right.
And so they were like, we'll take this little boy. And
Well,
then what happened?
the actual hospital picked the child, and they walked in and looked at the child, and my father said, just 1 second. And he just walked up and down the rows of the children, and I was in the last cot at the very back, and I was laughing. But what he didn't know, that the laughing was part of withdrawal.
Really?
And he said, oh, this one's got a sense of humour, I'll take this one.
Wow,
So they
it
went,
was just that serendipitous.
yes, it was. And I think I'm a big believer in balance, and I think that I was meant to be with him, and that's how it happened.
He was a Holocaust survivor. Was your mother also a Holocaust survivor?
Yes, but she didn't go to the camp. She was in a big sewerage pipe for most of the war with her family and some of the same people from her village. Just before the war, she played ice hockey and she had a hip injury, but that never got solved because the war started. And so she was in this damp pipe for 3 or 4 years, and it developed into bowel cancer.
She wasn't able to have children, so they came to Australia. Did they meet after the war?
They were related and they knew each other from,
So they were distant cousins, yeah.
After the war, it was decimated. A lot of first cousins married because they were the only people that they knew. It was family. It was So they got married. They couldn't have children. She wasn't 100% well. But the fact that now that when my father had my sister with another woman, that this child looks like my mother.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's a very specific thing being raised as a child of Holocaust survivors. A lot of people wouldn't understand that. They say that the trauma can actually, can be passed on through DNA, which is not the case for you because you were adopted. But what did he tell you about his time in the concentration camp?
In the beginning of my life, not much. But after I married my second husband and then he threw me out of the family and the whole spiel, and then I came back into the family, he built the Sydney Jewish Museum. And in that time that he built it was when he finally opened up to me, and we sat and we went through all the photos and everything that everyone had handed in. And so we went to Europe. We went to visit this old auntie, like she was, 125 or something. And she gave him a small little candle holder that she'd made in the camp and a piece of barbed wire. It's actually in the museum. My father, being my father and really not understanding the rules and regulations, said, put it in your suitcase, we'll take it home. It was rusty. It was old. I said, I can't take that in my suitcase. He said, wrap it up in your pajamas. No one will know. And I did. And I brought it back. But
it was from the camp.
It was from the camp. And he started to open up about stories and that he was the putzer, which is like the shoeshine boy of the commandant, but being that he could get potato peels and he could sneak in the kitchen and get things. And he was telling me stories about...
How old was he when he was in the camps?
Well, he actually got thrown in at 18 for listening to the BBC. They caught him listening to the BBC and he was put in as a political prisoner. So he was in there way before they actually called it a concentration camp. And he did escape once, but he got to a river and like all good religious Jews, he had never been taught to swim. And there was no way for him to get over the river. So he had to get back into the camp before
he had to break in.
He had to
back
break
to the
in
camp
because he knew that he'd be shot.
Yeah. When did you find out you were adopted?
I was 10. I was 10 years old and another 10-year-old told me.
It was someone in your family, wasn't it? It
No,
wasn't a relation?
No, we were at the Lowy's place and I was downstairs.
It was a family friend.
And I had a fight with Peter. We spent a lot of time together. Had a fight with Peter.
Your father and
Frank
Lowy started Westfield together. So the two families were very, very close.
I wouldn't say very, very close, but they saw each other. Connected. And I had a fight with him and somehow it turned around and he goes, you know you're adopted, don't you? And I kind of looked at him and in my head as a 10-year-old, I've always been very I call it Spocky. I'm very logical. And I just went, walked upstairs because their house was, you went upstairs and outside to go to the pool area, and that's where he's sitting. I walked up to him. I said, am I adopted? And he goes, yep. I went, okay. And I walked away. In my mind, it was quite logical. I'm blonde, blue-eyed, no one else is.
So you didn't have some kind of existential crisis? Do my parents love me? Did you have all those fantasies about my real mum and dad will come and get me one day?
Afterwards, I kept on saying but I say it out loud. I said to him, I could be a princess. You got to treat me like a princess. Or if they're dead, I'm a queen. And this is at age 11 and 12. And I'd say to him, please refer to me as Queen Betty. And he would go, you're nuts. I said, yes. That's the good thing about all this. I said, it's not affecting me. I'm just a queen.
And ironically, you were the child of a billionaire living this very princessy life.
Yes.
And your real family, or your biological parents, I should say, were in a very different situation.
Well, they were dead by then, but yeah. She died in the same year as my mother died. But she died in different circumstances. She died... The story is that she died in the house because she'd helped these guys escape from jail. And it was some story that I knew, but I choose to forget. So,
did you ever find your biological father?
No, but someone gave me his name once, and he'd fought in Vietnam, and then he became a policeman. I don't know.
You never looked him up?
No, I don't need to. I mean, my father's my father. John Saunders is my father. Etta Saunders is my mother. Clara Saunders was my stepmother. You know, if you add them all up, it's like 3 mothers, 2 fathers, 12 grandparents. I don't need that. I just got 1 father, 1 mother.
When you were 11, Etta died, your mum died, and then a week later, your best friend died?
Yeah.
Tell me about what happened.
She had leukemia.
Your friend did?
Yeah, my friend did. And I went over there to stay with her, and she just died in the sleep. It was...
While you were there?
Yeah, while I was there. I was in the same bed. I had learnt before this about death, so being a very logical person, I just went, okay, because death is just a part of life. You need to accept it, and you need to inhale it and say it's happened, and look at it as something that is a joy in your heart, not a dagger that is ripping it apart.
You're so pragmatic. You were an 11-year-old girl whose mother died and then whose best friend died in her arms. It's funny now it would be, let's get grief counsellors, therapy.
No, I'm not a believer in that. I
Your
believe...
memories of that time though,
Yeah.
What are they?
Everyone was making a fuss around me, and I was just sitting there going, okay, not looking at my watch, but just looking to see, okay, yeah, Thunderbirds are on in half an hour. My father had a psychologist. He thought I was a little autistic because I can be very emotional and then I can just be blank. The blank means that I'm just not interested, not that I'm autistic. And so they sent me to a psychiatrist, and I had like 4 sessions, and she was the psychiatrist that was the one for child psychiatrist for Australia or whatever. And she goes, has a letter back to my dad and says, she's totally sane. That's all she said was, she's totally sane. And I went, okay, I'll take that one.
Did your parents adopt any other children?
Yes, my brother. And they knew there was something wrong with him, but...
From the same orphanage?
No. By then it was just... there was a child there. But because she was sick and had cancer, they knew there was something wrong because the cord was around his throat when he was born. But as he grew, you could see there was something more wrong with him. And now he's intellectually handicapped, paranoid, schizophrenic and autistic. But he is one of the most beautiful little, not little, he's over 6 foot, human beings. And in some ways it's like, I think, well, what would happen if he hadn't been adopted?
How old were you when he was adopted?
5.
And he was a baby? Or?
Yeah, he was a baby. But as he grew, I just looked after him. And then he was 5 when our mother died. He was traumatised by it to a point. And then he just did what Mark did. So we had nannies and everything else. I basically looked after him until my father got remarried, and then I still looked after him.
So your father was building his business. working like crazy. His beloved wife had just died. He had an 11-year-old and a 5-year-old who had an intellectual disability. What did he do next?
He worked.
Yeah.
I didn't see him. He worked. I knew he was home because he had squeaky shoes, because he had to have special shoes made, and they squeaked. One of them squeaked. So I could hear it go past my door at night, and then in the morning I'd see him for 2 minutes and then he'd be gone.
Who nurtured you? Who looked after you?
Me. We had a wonderful nanny for the first 2 years, but she had her own family problems. Her son died and she was older.
When your father got remarried, how did you feel about that?
It was hard. I was 15, she was 25.
How old was he?
50? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was 50. And I think
fairly standard second wife stuff.
Yeah, I think it was more of a,
with no
my children
disrespect to
need a
second
mother.
wives.
She's, they suited each other. She was more religious in the Jewish way because I went to Skeggs. So I went to a Church of England school. I knew everything. Because I was a little naughty, they'd stick me in the choir or they'd stick me in the, I had to go to chapel and
And it's interesting because most people would think that, survivors of the Holocaust usually went one of two ways. A lot of them lost their faith, because of the Holocaust. Others sort of doubled down on it. Your father and stepmother had a little girl.
They did.
Did you and your brother feel a little bit like outsiders? I imagine that's always a bit of a challenging time.
Not outsiders, but, like my life changed. I wasn't allowed to have friends over because Clara was Clara. That's you can't explain a Clara. She could be playing the piano and doing Liberace numbers in 1 minute. The next minute she was upset and yelling at you. So, she had her own journey. It didn't really match with mine. And so I just
did your own thing.
Yeah, I did my thing. I kept away from her. And
growing up in a billionaire house, people imagine that it's staff and caviar and boats and ponies and this incredible life. What's it actually like?
Well, ours wasn't like that because my father was very much a person you work for what you get. So at 13 I started working as Santa's helper at the shopping centres. And I had the little red skirt and everything else. At 15, I started working at Grace Brothers, which is now Myers, but I always worked. For my 18th birthday, my father said, your present is up in the garage. And I was like, great. I was so excited.
A car, a house.
Yep.
A pony.
A
bit old
bike.
for a pony. Oh, it was a push bike.
It was a push bike. 3 months later, he bought me a third-hand Tirana, which I tinkered with. But that was his way of saying, what do you have to look forward to if you get it now? I always had to work for what I got. On my 21st, I got a plastic comb.
A plastic comb? Why?
On my 21st, my father was in his car being driven and he said to his chauffeur, stop. He got out, he walked into a chemist and he looked around. My father never went into shops and he never bought anything for anyone. And he saw this. When I say comb, I mean like a
hair comb, like an ornamental hair comb clip thing.
And he saw one had little sparklies on it, and he said, "That's very nice." And he walked up and he paid for it in cash, and held the little bag with the comb in it, and then he came to my place with the same bag, the chemist bag, squished up, and he said, "I bought this for you. Happy birthday." I mean, they gave me a huge 21st, but that comb was worth more than any present I've ever had.
You went on to get married and have 2 children and live the fancy sort of eastern suburbs life that had been laid out for you for a while, no?
No. I wasn't allowed to get an engagement ring. What do I have to look forward to?
But what do you mean you weren't allowed? Didn't the person you were marrying have something to do with it? No.
It was a partial arranged marriage because none of my friends were Jewish. I never mixed with the Jewish crowd. And I met my first husband, Herman, through friends of Clara's. And he was 10 years older than me. I was just at a point of, okay, whatever. Even when I was walking down the aisle, my father said to me, you can turn around now and walk out, because he knew it wasn't right for me.
Yeah. So why did you do it?
Because, I don't know, something inside of me just said do it. which if I hadn't done it, because my second husband, who I've been married now for 33 years, he was 10 or 11 years old at the time when I got married.
Bit young then to marry.
He's 11 years younger than me. So, yeah, he was 11 years old
So
when
you
I
had
got
to
married.
wait. You had to do something for the next 10 years.
So I had to wait. So I had 2 children, and then one day I realised that now was the time to get divorced.
Why?
Our lives didn't mesh. He liked to play cards. He was very much into that traditional life, and I wasn't. I would rather go to a pub. So we were just not right for each other. But we had 2 beautiful children, and that in itself was worth everything. Mm. And then I was his bridesmaid. I was the bridesmaid at his second wedding.
Were you?
Yes, because I have this theory of hatred is a man-made thing. If we're left to be just human, hatred should not be a part of – it just eats you up.
It's not innately in us.
No, it's I can let it go. And I thought it was wrong to let it go, but I let it go. So I just made friends with his future wife, who I was there when he met her because it was at his mother's place. And
were you still married at the time?
No, I was married to Daniel, my
So
new
you
husband.
stayed in contact because of your kids?
Well, no, his mother would ring me up and say, come and get a cake.
So Jewish.
and I'm not even her daughter-in-law anymore. Anyway, we went to my ex-sister-in-law's place for dinner. Herman was there and Irene, who's now his wife, was there, and they hadn't met. This was the first time they were meeting. And my mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law, was cutting up a cake. And she said, do you want a piece of cake? I said, yeah, sure. But I was sitting on the other side of Irene. So Irene grabbed the plate of cake to pass to me, and my mother-in-law screamed at her, that piece of cake is for Betty. Don't you take it. But one thing led to another, and Irene, who is half Irish, half Italian. She's about 4'11". She has
Makes you look tall.
Well, yes, she does. But she has a heart. She's an angel. She's the only person I've ever met in my life who's a true angel.
You have the most extraordinary family, and I do think we do need some kind of whiteboard to draw it all up.
Well, the easy way to go is my ex-husband was born in 1949. I was born in 1959. My husband was born in 1969, and Herman's wife was born in 1979. My son was born in 82.
Okay.
My sister was born in 78.
You've got a good memory.
Well, I know because it's all 10 years.
It's a
but
good
my
way,
sister
yeah.
was born the 7th of the 8th, 78.
Ah, I'm sure that's suspicious. When you met Daniel, your husband, you met at a pub. You were a 29-year-old single mother.
That's all right.
A 29-year-old single mother. He was 19.
Yes, and he worked down at the Garden Island.
And that was kind of before the age of MILFs, But there was something between you.
Yeah.
It's not the most likely combo.
No, it was literally love at first sight.
What do you mean?
I mean that I looked at him, and the first time I looked at him, I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. It's like people say that it happens when you die, when you're about to die in an accident. No, it happens when you fall in true love. And I saw us as old people together. I saw everything. And here is this young guy that is from Matraville, hardly has a cent to his name, earns $19,000 a year, totally wrong in every aspect of the word. But there was this beautiful spark that belonged to me, not to anyone else, but to me. I gave up everything for him.
Because your dad said, if you marry this guy, you're out. Why?
Because he was from the wrong side of the tracks. His family were Ukrainians, and at that time, most of the guards in the concentration camps were Ukrainians. In my father's eyes, I had a second chance, marry a doctor, a lawyer, someone Jewish. He's Catholic. But, boy, it was the best thing I ever did, not just in the marriage sense, but in the sense that I had to go to work. I had to find a job, so I found a job cooking at an RSL thing.
So you literally had previously access to whatever you needed and then you were cut off.
Yep.
At any point did Daniel say, hey, I thought this would be a good idea, but I did think that you had a lot of money. And now, I mean, I'm being facetious because obviously you didn't. But you both got together thinking, right, this is what our life might look like. Already challenging enough, big age gap, you're a single mother, divorced. And then suddenly it's like, okay, you're on the bare bones of your ass. Did you ever have any wobbly moments where you were like,
No. The first thing he said to me is, I'm going to teach you how to make ham sandwiches. I got up at 4:30 every morning because he left at 5 with his father, and I literally made a full loaf of bread with ham, nothing else, no butter, nothing, for his lunch.
because you'd never had to do that before?
No, that's what he wanted.
Oh.
So
He
I
liked
made his,
that.
I made his lunch every day, and I made the children's lunch. The only thing my father did pay for was the children's education because he said, and let me keep my car.
Where did you live?
Matraville, in his grandparents' place. We painted it, and it was just a small weatherboard place where his parents live now, but they've redone it. Can you imagine taking your furniture from an eastern suburbs mansion and trying to stick it into a house in Matraville that is tiny? It was
Culture
not
shock.
easy. Oh,
For you?
I went through a lot. He taught me how to do a lot of things. Cooking I could do, but cleaning, ironing, washing,
Who did all that for you before?
the housekeepers. I didn't do it. You drop your clothes on the floor if you make it to the clothes thing, and then they're back in the cupboard. But all of a sudden I had to do everything for myself. The Eastern Suburbs princess got knocked on the head, dragged through the mud, and came out the other side thinking, oh, that was great. And I think every Eastern Suburbs Jewish princess should go through a year of this. And I think that's why I related to my fans so well, because I was
With the supercars.
with the supercars, because I was one of them for 4 years. I caught buses.
all the things that regular people do that rich people
We had to wait.
and rich children often
We had to
don't have
wait
to do.
on a Saturday. They used to bring out the cart with the meat that was used by date was that day, and we used to wait for that to come out, and we'd get the sausages off that. And the kids would get the sausages, and we ate whatever, because he was on 19,000 gross a year.
So you had a completely different socioeconomic experience
Yes.
overnight.
Yeah, overnight. Everything seems to happen to me overnight. And for some reason, which is, I probably thank the powers that be, they've allowed me to be able to soak it all in and not be traumatised by it. I mean, otherwise I'd be in a mental institution somewhere. But everything that's happened to me in my life was just, when I think back on it, it actually, if I wrote it down as a story, it would be very scary. When I see something that scares me, I walk into it. I don't allow the fear to overcome what joy I might find in there.
What was the hardest part of going from your very privileged life to one sort of on the poverty line almost?
Was my children, trying to explain to them why I was doing this. I mean, they were young.
What did you tell them?
I told them that the truth, I did it for love. And my father had a cousin in Israel, and the cousin came to Australia to visit him, and because I used to ring my father every day. I used to ring his secretary and ask me.
When he wasn't speaking to you?
No, when he wasn't speaking to me. I would ring him every day at about 4:30, and I'd get the secretary and she'd put me through, and he'd pick up the phone. He wouldn't say hello, wouldn't say anything, and I'd say, "Hi, Daddy. Well, today Matthew did this, and today Ricky did that, and Anthony was being a pain in the bum, so I had to, do this." I told him my whole day, every day. And then when he'd heard enough, he just put the phone down without saying a word to me.
And why did you do that?
Because this was not my problem. I wasn't shunning him.
But you didn't feel hurt by his
No.
rejection?
I wouldn't say hurt. I understood his rejection. I understood it, and I went, well, I don't feel that way. So I am going to tell you what is happening to my children, what's happening to me. I want you to know, I want you in my life. And if the only way I can do that is to talk to an empty phone, I'll do it.
And you did that every day for how long?
Every day for 4 years.
And then what changed?
The Israeli cousin came and said to my father, "You're nuts." And my father said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Does he hit her? No. Does he drink? No. Is he a drug addict? No. How does he treat her?" My father said, "Well, from what I can get from other people, he treats her like a queen. Cooks meals for her, he does this." And he said, "And this is why you're not talking to her, because the man wants to treat her like a queen." He said, "You are nuts. Get together, talk." So we did. I went on a holiday with him and my brother, which I was involved in a plane crash. But that's beside the point. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Things like this happen to me, but I will walk away.
I usually laugh when someone says, and then I was involved in a plane crash. But you know.
The thing is, if you're in a plane crash with me, you know you're going to survive.
Yeah, you do.
It's just this thing I have.
Yeah,
You know,
I know.
like, I don't know.
And your relationship was, plane crash aside, your relationship was repaired.
It was repaired.
And did that mean that the money tap got turned back on?
Sort of. Like I said before, he made me work for what I got. So I call it the string effect. Every Jewish parent has what they have, the string effect, where they put the pin with the string and it goes so far and he said, you can live in that circle. And so my father had this started off with this long string. He said, I'll buy you a house. I said, okay. So I looked in Randwick and Maroubra and he says, this is a bit too far, Bettika. So he shortened the string until I bought the house that was on the corner of Old South Head Road and Victoria's Road. It's right on that corner where the lights is. We moved in there, we lived there, and then we moved from there to Darling Point, and it was one of those old Victorian type houses. And I woke up one morning and said, we've got to move. And Daniel goes, why? I said, because I've got this feeling we've got to move. So we sold it and we bought in Victoria Road in Bellevue Hill. And in Darling Point, the houses on old Victorian houses on either side, all of a sudden were pulled down and made into apartments. So it was the one that we'd been in. But besides all that, and I've just totally forgotten.
So your dad wanted you close to him, living close to him?
Close to him. And then Daniel converted.
To Judaism?
To Judaism.
Why did he decide to do that?
Because we had a son and he said, I want to stand next to my son at his bar mitzvah.
So he didn't do it for your dad? I mean,
No.
The cynic could say you rang your dad every day to try to get back in the will. Daniel converted to try to get more money. I don't get that sense from
money's
you.
never been a big thing for me. The only big thing that I do is my sport, the motor cars, and my jewellery. I like diamonds
You
for
like
some
some
reason.
bling.
Well, it's not. I don't even call it bling. I just like it. I like the sparkly part.
Yeah, yeah.
And because I've always been a big girl, I used to weigh 150 kilos, which is a big girl. You could rest a cup and saucer on my backside.
Because you're small in stature.
I'm about
you're not very
5'3",
tall.
and I weighed 150 kilos. You know, people go on about, you must have had some traumatic something to make you do this. And I went, nah, I just like food. And then one day at the kindergarten, someone said, which one's Anthony's mother? And they said, the fat one. And I went, okay, stop eating shit, start eating well. I lost 60 kilos. That's where I'm now. So when people say to me, oh, you're a curvy girl or you're a big girl, I go, oh, you should have seen me when I was 150 kilos. I think I look beautiful. I'm 63 years old. Why on earth would I trouble myself putting myself on a stupid diet that they all go on or anything else? I'm happy. I've got my dogs. I've got my husband. I've got the country. Why on earth does it matter if I wear a 16 or a 12 gene? It's a number.
You're in such a unique position to reflect on the difference between nature and nurture, and it sounds like something you've thought about a lot. How much of who you are, Betty Klimenko, today or through your life is about you were born that way, and how much is a result of your upbringing with your father and mother?
I'd say it's a good 60-40. I'd say 40% of the blood that runs through my veins, and the rest is my father. My father was a weird man, so that's where I got my weirdness from. I'd be sitting in a meeting and he would drop a piece of ice down my back. He'd just walk past me and drop a piece of ice down my back, and I'm sitting there going, you blah, blah, blah. But he could be a mean. I mean, you have to think back that we were in a different time, and I was on the board, and, if he wanted to, he would say to me, be quiet, no one wants to hear your opinion. Not because I was a woman, but because I was his child.
Now, there's more to the story. So we've recorded a second bonus episode for Mamamia paid subscribers. You can hear part 2 of our conversation where we speak about what happened when Betty was orphaned for the second time.
When my father died, he'd retired from Westfield. He'd built up a business. But back then, that's going back 25, 30 years, it was worth much less than what everyone thought it was. You know, in the 25 years since he's died, we have 20-fold times made
Increased the value.
Increased the value.
What she does with all her money.
My father once told me something, and I go by the same thing. I don't have to worry where my breakfast is coming from. That's it. And how much can I do to help people who need help?
And what happened when she went to find her biological family? To hear it and become a Mamamia subscriber, follow the links in the show notes. No Filter is produced by Gia Moylan. The executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. And I'm Mia Friedman. Thanks for having me in your ears.